Okay, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today I'm really thrilled to have with me as my guest Rick Horvath, who's a partner at Dechert. Rick, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, Rick, you definitely have one of the most unusual backgrounds. I interview a lot of lawyers, but very rarely do I come across somebody who has a math degree and even a graduate math degree. So let's just dive right in and tell me why you wanted to study math in college.
So, going back to college, I went to Lehigh University
Uh-huh.
and I signed up for an honors calculus class, which was built around not just teaching calculus, but the theory underlying calculus.
Yep, I understand.
And so we spent those 3 semesters just redoing all the proofs and doing derivatives through the limit calculation, things like that.
Yep.
And I really enjoyed the analytical rigor. I had a professor for it, Vladimir Dobrich, who has since passed on,
Huh.
but he was a fantastic professor, one of my favorite professors of all time. Um, and it got me interested in math. And keep in mind, I went to college thinking I was going to be a physics major.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
started off that way, and I realized I didn't enjoy lab work, but I really enjoyed the analytical rigor and the beauty of mathematics. And I ended up shifting over and became a full-blown math major.
Interesting. Well, what about in high school? You must have liked math in high school.
I did. I also just like a wide variety of topics. You know,
Yeah.
I I've
Yeah.
I have always enjoyed reading, even since a young age. I was picking up copies, folios from Shakespeare and reading them before we would get to them in school.
Yeah. Interesting.
Um, so I had a lot of weird interests.
Huh.
And I enjoyed math, but again, I just always thought I was going to go down the road of being a physics major.
Yeah.
Um, I did well in math. I took calculus in high school,
Yeah.
and so that means even though I scored well enough on the AP exam to skip a few semesters of calculus, I went back to the beginning just to take the honors calculus program.
No, I totally get it. I totally get it. So when you did your math major, you must have some kind of emphasis. What area of math did you emphasize in you must have like a senior thesis or some area you focused on.
So I focused on real analysis, and then in grad school, that shifted towards stochastic calculus.
Huh.
So real analysis is just a fancy way of saying more complex calculus. And uh, stochastic calculus is okay, now let's do calculus involving probabilities and integrals over spaces with an infinite number of gaps.
Oh, interesting. I don't think I'm super familiar with that. I mean, I took obviously some math, but not probably that much. Did you have to write any kind of thesis or anything like that when you were in the master's program?
No, I did not have to write a thesis in my master's
Okay.
program.
Okay.
Uh, Stochastic calculus is the calculus that underlies a lot of financial mathematics.
Oh,
So
interesting.
Black-Scholes formula,
Mm.
in connection with the stochastic calculus, took financial mathematics courses. So they go hand in hand because
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
all about these random movements and
Huh.
the modeling.
Huh. Were you in a PhD program or you dropped out or you were never thinking about getting a
I
PhD?
I was thinking about getting a PhD. I was in a PhD program. I again very much enjoyed the subject matter. I enjoyed the theory and the reality. And it maybe sounds craven, but I looked at the life of the average math professor, and I decided I did not want that and was considering another career. And at the time, I hadn't considered going down the quant road, which maybe I should have, maybe I shouldn't have. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I looked at all my interests. I looked at, my love of history, my love of economics, my love of, just the language and history and reading. And I'm like, okay, and I also have this analytical skill. So maybe I go to a career where I can combine all of that. And
Huh.
that led me to the law.
Interesting. Was that at the suggestion of somebody else, or you figured it out on your own? How did you like end up kind of even taking a look at that field?
It was self-reflection and just deciding what I think I would be happier at. I
Yeah.
mean, again, I love math, but I just I wanted something more.
Yeah, yeah. Now, did you ever teach math or anything like that? Even as a student grad, like, did you teach classes or anything like that?
So I did. I taught between my undergrad and grad school. I taught public school,
Okay.
and as a grad student, I was a teaching assistant for a number of calculus courses.
Okay. Yeah.
And actually, while I was an undergrad, I was a teaching assistant for the same honors calculus class I took when I was a freshman. So
Yeah.
in my senior year, I was helping to teach those courses.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any particular math classes you didn't like or weren't good at? I'm always curious to know
I,
like what you tried and like didn't like.
I hate algebraic theory. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. Uh, it just doesn't work in my brain.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
I definitely like the visualization that I get from real analysis.
Yeah,
It
interesting.
just makes sense to me.
Did you
Um,
did you do any like practical like applied math or anything like that? Was there any kind of
I took a course or two in it, but I enjoyed the theory so much more.
right, right, interesting. Huh. Well, so when you finally decided to go to law school, what was that like? I mean, was that must have been really different, or was it? I don't know. Was it really different?
It it was different, obviously because there was a lot more reading.
Yeah,
Um,
it's true.
you're reading in math, reading in mathematics is much different than reading in law. Um, but I had a crim law professor my first year who actually made the observation that the two majors law schools love to see for admissions purposes
Uh-huh.
are philosophy and mathematics.
Huh.
And the reason being, in both of those fields, you have to learn analytical thought.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so it's easier for those students to pick up legal thinking because they already have training in analytical thought
Yeah.
than someone who comes from a soft humanities background where the analytical thought of the law is not as emphasized.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's true. And obviously, like math, you have to prove things, so you have to establish all the criteria and the definition. I mean, definitions, I mean, that half of mathematics proof is setting up the definitions. So
It,
that actually part of it works pretty well.
and actually it translates very well for what I do. So, I think a lot about my practice. What are the core principles? What are the axioms that you work from?
Yeah.
And then everything flows out of that.
Yeah.
In mathematics, um, for those who don't know it, there are axioms in mathematics that you just simply must accept as true. You cannot prove them. There are actually proofs out there that show you cannot prove everything in mathematics.
Hmm.
And so the end result is there are a few things you just must accept as true, and then everything evolves out of it. And in fact, there's an old early 1900s German treatise that did this in an amazing way where they take, I think it's 5 axioms for
Uh-huh.
arithmetic,
Uh-huh.
and then build up all of number theory from those 5 axioms.
Interesting. Interesting. Now, when you started law school, did you know what kind of law you were going to practice, or did you just said, I'm going to study law and let's just see what comes out of this on the other end?
I didn't, I mean, like everyone going to law school, unless you had a family member who was a lawyer, and I did not,
Yeah.
you think being a lawyer involves litigation.
Yeah.
So I figured I'd do something with litigation, and that kind of fit me because I'm not shy of getting in a fight, an intellectual fight, that is.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I figured I'd go in a litigation route, but I did not know what that would mean.
Yeah, yeah. Well, tell me a little bit that how did you get to the practice you ended up being in?
So coming out of law school, I started in Skadden's Delaware office.
Okay.
And anyone who knows Delaware knows that it's very much built around corporate governance issues.
Yeah.
So as a result of that, and even though I made my way out to the Bay Area now 16 years ago, I've continued on with that focus of corporate governance matters. And to this day, I do a lot of litigation in it, but I also do advice work. And so that's how I got to where I am today. But again, with the corporate governance principles, I very much approach it from, okay, well, what are the default rules? And once you know the default rules, a lot of it follows.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you kind of stumbled into it, right? It wasn't like that wasn't a deliberate thing, but you just happened to like that area of law and just kind of stayed in it.
I did, and it's an area of law that's not for everyone.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
fully get that because
yeah,
there's a lot you have to learn. There's a huge substantive lift to get there.
yeah.
You're dealing with decades of case law and a very complex code, and not just in Delaware but in other jurisdictions. California itself is its own interesting beast. Um, but it's a practice that really appeals to me because again, it's one that it's a very analytical practice, even at the trial level.
Huh. So what is your mix between advisory and litigation, would you say? Is it 50-50 mix or it's mostly advisory and mostly litigation? What's your mix?
I'd say it's pretty close to 50-50. Some years it may be more advisory, some years it may be more litigation. And
Okay.
the advisory can be just advising on, how to run a good process, working with my corporate colleagues, advising on activism matters,
Yeah.
to, litigation, from books and records to oversight cases to merger cases.
Huh.
I'm pretty happy with it.
Huh.
It's a fairly unique practice.
And so it's not you don't do transactions. You're not a transactions lawyer.
I'm not a transactions lawyer, so like I can obviously review an agreement and
Yeah.
comment do so frequently where it's like, here's what this means,
Yeah. Yeah.
and have worked on negotiations. But my advisory work is also much more of a, okay, here's a decision to be made. Here's the process you need to run to make sure that decision
Yeah.
gets the appropriate level of deference.
Yeah, yeah. Huh, interesting. Well, I'm gonna guess you don't get to use your math in your job in any way, but do you do anything? Do you do math as a hobby in any way? Is there anything that you get to scratch that itch?
Uh, you know, Earlier in my career, I would do occasional mathematics and, try and solve problems. And, you know, that's diminished over the years, just because it doesn't come up so much. Um, it still can be helpful for when dealing with experts.
Yeah,
As you can imagine, there's some fairly easy translation there.
yeah,
Um, but you know Mathematics is not just numbers, it's really a way of thinking,
yeah, yeah,
and in that sense I do carry it forward to
yeah,
today.
yeah, yeah. Do you have any regrets or that you didn't become a quant guy and do a hedge fund or something like that? Maybe you could have made more money. I don't know. But I mean, that obviously is a pretty common path for a lot of math majors.
If I could go back and do it again, I would probably have gone the route of a double major in mathematics and economics.
Hmm.
um and who knows where that would have taken me.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was first generation college in my family, so I didn't really know all the ins and outs, and I can't really complain where I've ended up today because I like my career.
Yeah.
But I think that's one thing I would have done a little bit differently, is get that math and the economics degree.
Did your math professors or anything scratch your heads when you told them you were going to go to law school?
Yeah, in fact, there was one law professor who goes, "There's too many lawyers. I'm not writing you a recommendation."
Well, that's not very helpful.
Uh,
Well,
I don't fault him at all. It was at least it was a good answer, but uh, I obviously didn't impact me in any way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it sounds like the legal career has obviously worked out well for you. Do you think at some point, maybe later in your career, you might ever like go and teach math or do something else? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I get to deal with math with my kids today. They're growing up, and as you know, in California, there's a push away from more rigorous mathematics curriculum, so that
Yeah.
gives me more opportunity to use what I know. Um, I mean, when I retire and if I need something to keep myself busy, which I probably will, I could see myself teaching math again,
Yeah, yeah,
even in a sort of unofficial capacity, like as a tutor.
yeah.
Um, but you know, so I could see that happening. I mean, I do love teaching it, and I carry that over into what I do today because with that, I love mentoring and guiding associates. It's the same thing.
Yeah, totally, totally. Can you solve a differential equation today?
Oh man, probably not. It's been so long. There are some things I know I could do, but I probably not a differential equation.
That's always a question I like to ask, just to see if anyone is, if you're still, if you had answered yes, I would really be impressed, actually.
No, I have a good idea of the things I could do today, but that's one I probably would not be able to do. It's like, I mean, give me a month to like rehone those skills and maybe,
Yeah,
but like
yeah,
if you gave me one right now,
yeah.
I mean, I've even forgotten what the integral of cosine x dx is. It's been so long.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I wouldn't want to try to answer that either. Um, well, Rick, it's been a wonderful conversation. It was such a treat to talk to somebody who's a math major. It's just so rare, and I really appreciate your taking the time and sharing your story with me.
You're welcome. I thank you for the reach out, and I appreciate speaking with you on this.
This is Richard Hsu and Rick Horvath.